Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the globe. My name is Dr. Joy Malala. I am a lecturer at Aston Law School, and I would like to welcome you all to the inaugural organized conference by the Global South Dialogue on Economic Crime, whose theme, Financial Crime Regulation, a Global South Perspective, is hoped will pique all your interests. This event has been proudly supported and hosted by Aston University, and part of the organizing committee includes some of our very brilliant LLM students. This network was founded out of a lacuna on discussions and perspectives from the Global South, where a lot of illicit funds flow out of and into, demonstrating the main challenges in combating financial crime. The consistent failure of contextualizing challenges to prevent and combat these crimes has always emerged, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. And the concept of legal transplantation of both standards and regulations without a nuanced approach has often left Global South countries with ineffective tools to meet international standards that are often imposed. Therefore, we are seeking to address these issues through a Global South perspective. And we are hoping that this interdisciplinary platform will focus on knowledge sharing, research, and capacity. We're also hoping to facilitate practical, innovative, and research-oriented responses to address complex economic crime challenges. As it is our inaugural conference, we are just starting out, and we hope to grow our network to include both stakeholders such as yourselves here today, our speakers, our delegates, and we are hoping to be or project the expertise of our leading stakeholders and members who are already extensively involved in combating economic crimes in the Global South. Finally, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Olabisi Akinkube, who is the Viscount Bennett Professor of Law and an Assistant Professor at the Schulich School of Law, Dalhousie University. He obtained his PhD in law from the University of Ottawa, an LLM from the University of Toronto, and an LLB from the University of Lagos, Nigeria. He has published on issues on and in the intersection of international economic law, international human rights law, international investment law, law and development, and the international courts and contracts as they relate to Africa. He explores these issues from the national, regional, and international contexts. Professor Bisi is a co-founding editor of Afronomics.org blog, which focuses on all aspects of international economic law as they relate to Africa and the Global South. And he's also in various editorial and advisory boards, including the African International Economic Law Network. Now, let us all welcome Professor Bisi.
Good morning, everyone, from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And I do want to say, first of all, congratulations to Dr. Nkechi Azinge Ibiri, to Dr. Folashade Adeyemo, yourself, Dr. Joy Malala Scholes, and Dr. Lovina Otudo of the Global South Dialogue on Economic Crime. This is indeed a very important platform that you have put together, and long may it grow in strength to achieve its objectives. When I received the kind invitation to be today's keynote speaker, the key things that spoke out to me in that invitation relates to the theme of today's conference. And quote, the conference theme was born out of deliberations on how the failure to contextualize challenges has been a critical hindrance to ensuring robust transplantation aimed at combating financial crime in the Global South. Furthermore, there is a lack of indigenous collaborative research in this area that originates homegrown regulatory and legislative challenges. They note further that the lack of coordinated interactions between lawmakers, policymakers, enforcement officials, and stakeholders in Global South has led to the proliferation of similar but unsuitable laws in certain countries. I do not disagree with all this, actually. Because of all of those, it was easy for me to say, your invitation for me to reflect on the general theme of this conference, as well as drawing gaps on these discussions in the Global South, is one I welcome. And to the extent that there is few minutes left, I'm happy to draw on the work of afronomics.org to illustrate some of the key work that this network can do. But before reflecting on those, one of the very interesting aspects of the REACH program of today's event relates to the subject of illicit financial flows. Indeed, one of the various ways, as we can see from today's program, is that the Global South is consistently milked of revenues of significant level of resources that would have otherwise been critical to the socioeconomic development of the rights of its peoples. Illicit financial flows primarily perpetrated by transnational corporations, often in concert with national elites, represent an arena where economic resources, in terms of tax revenue due to developing African countries, are denied based on corporate legal structures that enhance the circumvention of national laws. The denial of revenues through corporate structures and tax havens, for example, with trade and investment dimensions, has direct and indirect implications for the sustainable development and aspirations of African states and indeed the Global South. IFFs, as properly called, impede the socioeconomic and sustainable development of African states as they drain foreign exchange, reduce domestic resources, stifle trade and its benefits, and worsen poverty and inequality. Understanding and addressing IFFs, amongst other many economic financial crimes, is pertinent to the sustainable development of not only African states, but the Global South as a whole. But what is interesting, though, is the fact that the notion of IFF in itself, just as an example for the conversation I'm having in a few minutes left, is multidimensional. Experts in this very important conference know that. It is also transnational in nature and is generally classified into 4 categories: tax and commercial practices, illegal markets, theft-related terrorism, financing, and corruption. But curbing it is not that easy, as we have seen. The point I want to make today is less to really deliberate on what IFFs are or indeed how we should understand them. That is a question I am convinced from the program that speakers will do good justice to. The point I want to do is to situate this particular example in the context of the historical and contemporary challenges of Global South countries. How do we imagine that IFFs are being perpetrated? Who are the perpetrators? Is it only about the Global North countries? Is it only about transnational corporations from the Global North? Or are there ways in which practices of national elites, for example, in the Global South countries are complicit in these particular situations? Are there ways in which corporate structures are being used to facilitate these economic financial crimes? I'm sure you would think or agree with me that these are important questions that we need to think about as we go ahead and do deliberating on these important issues of economic financial crimes. What more? The COVID-19 pandemic, right, has really shown before us and has heightened the vulnerability and exposure of the Global South to IFFs. International economic justice, fair trade regimes, deepening effects of climate change will continue to elude Global South countries without a deliberate and sustained multidisciplinary effort to address them. Confronting the inequality deepening implications of the COVID-19 pandemic should not be imagined outside of the ongoing work of the economic financial crimes that this conference and network really centers, as well as the well-being of the peoples of the Global South. The Global South and indeed African continent post-COVID-19 recovery plan must center economic financial crimes not just those emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic funding, as we see the pandemic corruption cases evolving from various parts of the global south, but the historical context in which all these have emerged. Let me give an example. One only needs to reflect on this core question of whether economic decolonization has ended in global south countries to be able to appreciate the various ways in which post-colonialism in many states, transnational companies never really allowed a lot of these countries in the name of political independence to carry on their own economic development. We look at the role of capitalism in today's world. We look at the inequalities it perpetrates. We look at the concentration of resources in the very small percentage of hands of the rich in the countries of the world. We look at the role of the Caribbean countries, right, and the islands, and how the transfer of funds occur that facilitates the movement of these core revenues and are denied from global south countries to different parts of the world other than places where they are generated. The breadth of these issues do not happen in vacuum. They happen against a deeply contested history of colonialism and post-colonialism, one that straddles a contention for power between the rich and the not so rich. And the construction of the not so rich, to be honest with you, and the co-constitution of the peripheries by the activities of transnational corporations into this world. As such, as the program indicates so clearly, it is critical to examine whether the current global regulatory framework is best suited to effectively combat financial crime in the global south. A critical, still quote, hindrance to combating financial crime in the global south is the failure of contextualizing challenges to preventing and combating these crimes. There are several reasons for this divergence between global standards, conventions, and indigenous realities. If we think about global standards, what does that mean, to be honest with you? Is the world so homogeneous that we need such global standards? Were they built with inputs, with ideas from experts like you all, who are representative of various parts of the global south? To what extent do our governments have a say in these norms and standards that are out there? These are ways in which the reproduction of the hegemony of the various global north countries that are powerful really are reproduced in various sites and carried on over time. So today's REACH program is a very interesting one, straddling issues not just on IFFs, but tax, digital finance, and economic crime. And it asks us or invites us to not just think about them in terms of the contemporary alone, but to imagine how old vulnerabilities, among other specific aspects, are being recreated. I think these are very critical core questions, to which I must again say congratulations to the convenience of this particular dialogue, putting them on the agenda. I'm conscious of time, so in the next 4 minutes or so, I would speak to another aspect that has come out from the invitation I got. One aspect of that relates to research, the role of research and publication in this particular area. I am one who is very skeptical of notions when people say there is no research from the global south on a particular issue. I believe that the very repetition of some of those statements in certain contexts, not in our context, is a way of reinforcing the notion that you can't find them. At times, we just need to look, and the research is being done. One aspect of that research relates to important work, which you all have done, I'm sure. But the other part of it is about the fact that a lot of the research that's been done by our Global South colleagues, those who teach on the continent, those who educate on the continent, are not there for us to see because they're not easily searchable on SSRN or because they're not there on High Online for people to see. And so we have to be careful about that. But one key thing I want to say is that I hope that in the deliberations you have today, you will question the status quo. The status quo has been dominated by too much by the hegemons and those that set those very standards, those that control them, those that the capitalists have captured in various ways and are given the very hymn book from which to sing to the rest of the world from. I hope that you plan to share the outcome of the deliberations from this particular conference. It's the inaugural one, so it is critical to share the outcome of the deliberations with the world. I am one of the editors of Afronomics Law, and I've just put the link in the chat. When we started this, it started with a measure of annoyance, not just coddling of the status quo. That annoyance relates to the maligning, right, and the consignment of scholarship by third world experts or global south scholars to the peripheries of publication. You had special issues that had just one person from Africa, and that looked very good. You had publications that had one scholarship from Asia, and that looked very good, not minding the heterogeneity and the wide range of ideas and challenges that these regions face. So I really hope that your plan, speaking now to not just the participants, but to the conveners, really would go in thinking about how you can make this scholarship accessible. Accessible because one risk that occurs to our people is that fantastic results of thinking are really behind paywalls for which our universities, whether in Africa or in Asia, may not have the resources financial to access. So it is critical to think about how open source outcomes can be useful for the purposes of the dissemination of those research outputs, in as much as they also question the status quo. The other part on which I will now plan to conclude is the idea that we have 4 women at the helm of affairs, or more at the helm of affairs of this particular network. That is something to celebrate. That is something to not just look on as though it happens so easily. The challenge is that we tend to, again, valorize the notion that we don't have women doing these things. I think when we see them doing it, we should acknowledge it. And from me to you all, congratulations to all the conveners on this important work you're doing. The resources that have been put on it, the momentum you're building, I'm sure we all will gather around to push you further to do the very best. And in my last reflection is to say, I do want to thank you once again for this invitation. My aim today has not been to give something so evoking and so academic, but I hope that in the sorts of issues I've touched upon, particularly the encouragement to question the status quo and to imagine and reimagine, as the conference invite, as asks us all to do, how we might invert these particular ideas and think about how ideas feed in their heterogeneity and in indigeneity to how the system can be rethought, that we boldly share those ideas even within the respective boundaries. I wish you all a very happy deliberation. I may not be here for the rest of the program, not because I'm not interested in it, but it's because it's only 6:18 a.m. from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor BC.